Rumor going around the internet is that tonight at Trump's Congressional speech that he's going to give at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, it's now about 6:30 Eastern Time, that he's going to announce either NATO withdrawing or him withdrawing from NATO, which I'm not sure how that's going to work considering that's a treaty and treaties have to go through the Senate. I suppose he could, like, all but pull out and be there in name only, but just have all the troops pull back to the U.S. and leave the bases empty and take our nuclear weapons and what have you. Or that he's pulling out of the UN, which, again, I don't think he can do unilaterally. That's one of the reasons why Wilson was not able to get America into the League of Nations, is because it had to go through the Senate, and the Senate didn't want anything to do with it after World War I. So, after World War II, we got pulled into it because of the Russian threat, and he may pull out of it, and being in name only. I just don't see him doing that, though, because the U.S. is part of the Security Council, which is one of the biggest cock blocks, for lack of a better word, to most of the other nations around the world. And two, he pulled Elise Stefanik out of Congress to be his UN ambassador, which Elise Stefanik was number 2 or number 3 as far as leadership goes in the House of Representatives for the Republicans. So it doesn't really make much sense for him to ask her to give up her spot in Congress to go be the UN ambassador for the US, and then a month later, after he's gotten into office, say, okay, well, we're pulling out of the UN. I just don't see it happening. My guess is that there's going to be an announcement of, basically, it's just going to be him and the U.S. dealing directly with the Russians, and they're not going to allow Zelensky, Ukraine, and the EU to be involved. It's going to be, hey, we're going to make a deal with the Russians. Either you can sign it, or we're going to pull out, take all our military aid, economic aid, because if people don't know, a lot of the way that the Ukraine government has been able to run and pay all its people and its pensioners and literally everything is through the American taxpayer dime. I think we spent like 100 billion or 75 billion, somewhere in that area. And we've also spent like 60 billion in military aid. So when you hear the media trying to say that, oh, well, the U.S. hasn't given as much military aid as the EU, technically that's true. I think they've given like supposedly 100 billion as a whole for the EU, and we've only given around 60 billion according to the official estimates. But we've also given over 100 billion in economic aid, plus another 20 billion or whatever that we gave last year, plus all the, economic or military drawdowns that Biden did, announcing, couple billion here aid, couple billion there, military aid. So, and I think it's a lot more. I think Trump is right that it's closer to, hundreds of billions of dollars, more than they're saying publicly. Because a lot of that stuff is fungible. You have black budgets. There's all kinds of ways that you can play around with it. I mean, good Lord. The U.S. military hasn't been able to pass an audit once. Not once. So, yeah, something's going on there. Anyways, I just wanted to make this video because last week, whenever Zelensky was supposed to come make the Ukraine and U.S. minerals deal, everybody thought that it was going to be, signed and done. And I was like, no, I don't think it's going to happen. If you've been paying attention, Zelensky has been saying one thing behind closed doors and doing something totally different whenever the media gets around or is in public. Scott Bessent went over there, was supposed to sign or get Zelensky to sign the minerals deal in Kyiv, and they had a row over there, and supposedly, Zelensky kept Scott Bessent waiting for hours, and they kept telling him, oh, well, Zelensky's a sleeper, or something like that. Don't know if that's true, but, that was the rumors. And then Keith Kellogg went over there, which is Trump's, he's not his ambassador, but it's supposed to be like his front guy to try to get this peace deal done between the Ukrainians and the Russians and the U.S., and they were supposed to have a press meeting afterwards. And they met, and the press meeting got canceled. There was no public statement, really, except from Keith Kellogg that said, oh, well, we had a frank discussion, or, something along those lines, which means absolutely nothing. I mean, if you read between the lines, it means, hey, we yelled at each other and nothing came of it. So then the rumor was that Zelensky was going to sign the minerals deal in Munich. And really, Zelensky doesn't have to come to America to sign this deal. He can sign it over in Ukraine and then just send it over for President Trump to sign. I mean, technically, it's only the Treasury Secretary and their Minister of Foreign Finance or whoever that really needs to sign it. Trump and Zelensky signing it is only for the cameras. So Zelensky doesn't even really have to sign it. And it's already being approved by the Ukrainian parliament, which is made up of a bunch of Zelensky's political pals. Like, he's outlawed pretty much all opposition. Or if he hasn't outlawed them, he's run them out of the country or put them under investigations. Pretty much trying to make it that he's the only party in town, so they can't get rid of him. Anyways, they're supposed to go to Munich, sign it there. They didn't, because him and Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance got into it at Munich, because once again, Zelensky was saying one thing in private and then doing something else totally different in front of the cameras. So I wanted to make this just so I could say, hey, I don't think it's what the rumors are saying, that Trump is going to pull out of NATO or pull out of the UN. I think it's going to be him saying, hey, the Europeans and the Ukrainians aren't serious about peace, we're going to negotiate directly with the Russians and come up with a deal. If they don't like it, they can lump it. We'll pull out all our economic and military aid, and y'all can battle it yourselves. Because Europe is supposed to be far more invested in this than we are. Ukraine isn't in NATO. It's never supposed to be in NATO. For you to get into NATO, every NATO country that's already in NATO has to agree to it. And there's several countries that are never going to agree to Ukraine being in NATO. I mean, it's a pipe dream. So, I think that's what's going to happen tonight. We'll find out in a couple hours. Apparently, the Democrats are planning on having some kind of protest at the speech or walking out or whatever Democrats do to try to get headlines these days. I mean, good Lord. God. They try, but they're hurting right now. And honestly, I think we should just cut it. Just say, F it. We've tried. We've given y'all all this money. We've given Ukraine all this money for free. Europe gave all their money through loans and deals. And so, theoretically, they should get their money back. Now, I mean, I'm sure Ukraine can default on the loans, or if there's even a Ukraine left by the end of this war. But Joe Biden's dumb, mentally incapable self just gave all this money just so that he could show that, oh, we're with the Ukrainians. There's no daylight in between us, and with you till the end, whatever it takes, and we've got more important things to worry about. The Russians haven't been a threat since at least the 90s. And really, I say before that. But I'll leave that for other people to decide. But I know in my lifetime, they haven't been a threat. As a matter of fact, we have way bigger things to deal with and worry about. We've got $37 trillion in debt, which is probably more than that once you figure up interest and, mandatory spending like Medicaid and Social Security and all that. China is a lot more aggressive than Russia, and that's where our focus needs to be as America. The Western Hemisphere and the Asia Pacific theater. Let Europe deal with Europe. My God, we pulled their nuts out of the fire twice in the 20th century, World War I and World War II. Both times we didn't want to get involved, and then we were pretty much, World War I, we got pulled into it because of, the Lusitania and other ships getting torpedoed. I don't know. I feel like that's kind of a BS reason to go send all these people to war, but I wasn't alive back then. And then World War II, we didn't even declare war on the Germans. We declared war on Japan. It's just that Germany declared war on us after we declared war on Japan after Pearl Harbor. So that's twice we pulled Europe out of the fire in the 20th century. Then we spent 50 years paying for the Cold War. Protecting Europe from the Warsaw Pact. And Now it's time for Europe to stand on their own. They've got a great life over there because we've been paying for their security for 50 plus years, and now it's time for them to stand on their own. The problem is that they've let their military industrial complex go to basically nothing. They keep saying how they're going to step up and support Ukraine. Well, y'all couldn't even get, 1 million artillery shells together a couple years ago when y'all announced it. Y'all, Britain has more horses than tanks in their army, at least usable tanks that are ready to go right now. They have more admirals in the Navy than they do ships. The Europeans keep thinking that they're in the early 20th century time or mind frame of, we're still powerful, we're still, an empire. You're not. France is maybe the only one that's in a little bit better of a situation because they still produce some of their own stuff like submarines and, fighter jets and stuff like that. But there's no way that they're going to be able to support the Ukrainians militarily or economically when it comes to Russia. Ukraine doesn't have the manpower. They've been doing this for years, but they're having to pull, basically young adults off the street, kidnapping them in vans, sending them to the front to die, just so they can have a warm body on the front. And you can't keep soldiers on the front lines for months and years at a time. You have to give them a break. They have to be rotated out. They don't have the men. They don't have the hardware. They don't have anything that can stand up. And really, they're just playing into Putin's hands. I'm not for Putin. I'm not against Putin. I think the way that the Western media portrays Putin is very dishonest a lot of times. And Putin's not dumb. He's actually one of the smarter people leading a country in this world. And really, you're just playing into Russia's hands. Russia, if they had their way, which they're going to if this keeps going, they're going to go all the way to Odessa, Transnistria, to at least to the river, if not farther. The only reason they haven't pushed up farther than they have is because they're using their defensive lines to suck in Ukrainian manpower and destroy, so that they can destroy all the manpower. Because territorial gains is secondary to their goals. Their first goals in Ukraine is destroying their military capacity and really the regime, which is, everybody keeps saying a democracy. They are not a freaking democracy. Zelensky's time has come and gone. He was supposed to be out of power by now. They won't hold elections. He's run everybody out that could have been another leader. They're corrupt as hell. How is it Zelensky now worth over $1 billion? And he was just a comedian at the start of the war. So, if they keep this up, they're going to F around and find out. Russia's paid too much in treasure and blood to stop now. I'm not saying it's impossible that they won't sign a peace treaty, but I believe the political will in Russia right now is go as far as you can. because why stop short? They can't trust the West to hold to the agreements anyways. You know, they broke the Minsk agreements. They broke in the 90s they said they weren't going to push NATO any further towards the east, towards Russia's border. And now we've got at least 3 or 4 countries on Russia's border that are NATO countries. So we'll see what happens. I just think that that's the announcement that's going to be made tonight. Trump's going to say, hey, we're going to make a deal with the Russians. Zelensky isn't serious. Europe has their head in the clouds. And if y'all don't like the treaty that we come up with, the peace agreement, then we'll pull our aid, military, economic, and otherwise, and y'all can fight it out. And I feel bad for the Ukrainian people. I really do. They've probably lost between dead and, you know, permanently maimed and disabled. I'd say Ukraine itself has lost probably 1 million people, 1 million bodies. And the Russians, their casualties might not be as high, but it's probably at least got to be 500,000. So you're talking about 1.5 million people. And Zelensky seems just determined to see this to the end. And it doesn't matter to him how many Ukrainian men die. Just because, you know, over some land. Which, if they had made the agreement in Istanbul, they would have only lost a little bit of the Donbass and Luhansk. They would still have Kherson, Zaporozhye. They would still have a huge access to the Black Sea. But Biden or somebody sent Boris Johnson to tell Zelensky, no, don't sign the agreement. We'll send you all this stuff to fight the Russians. And really all it is a proxy war. The West using Ukraine as a proxy war to try to hurt the Russians. And Ukraine's going to be literally a graveyard when this is done. But unless cooler heads prevail and Zelensky goes, that's the way it's going to be. And I'm willing to bet all of Western Ukraine and all the way to Odessa and Transnistria will be taken by the end of this by Russia, if not the whole of Ukraine. I hate to say that, but that's how it is. So, we'll see what happens. Trump goes on in a couple hours. Should be interesting. It's always interesting with Trump. We'll see what happens. And, yeah.